They say you should never judge a book by its cover, but in a city like New York, we do it every single day. We judge the shoes, the watch, and the suit. But what happens when the man shivering in a soaking wet trench coat, being kicked out of a 5-star restaurant, holds the key to your entire past? I'm going to tell you the story of Elena, a waitress who risked her job to offer a stranger a warm seat, only to discover that the beggar was actually the billionaire CEO who fired her 3 years ago. And he wasn't just looking for dinner, he was looking for a traitor. This is a story about revenge, redemption, and the price of kindness. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it accused. It hammered against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the Gilded Cage, the city's most pretentious steakhouse, as if demanding to be let in. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil, aged leather, and old money. Elena Vance adjusted her apron, wincing as a sharp pain shot up her left calf. It was 8:45 p.m. on a Friday. The dinner rush was at its peak, a chaotic ballet of clinking crystal and hushed, expensive conversations. Elena, 32 years old, with eyes that held too many shadows for her age, forced a smile onto her face as she picked up a tray of cosmopolitans. "Table 4 needs water, Elena. Move it," snapped Rick, the floor manager. Rick was a man who wore suits 2 sizes too small and wielded his tiny amount of power like a medieval broadsword. "On it, Rick," Elena said, her voice steady. She had learned long ago that reacting to Rick only fed his ego. She navigated the floor with the grace of a veteran. 3 years. She had been working here for 3 years. It was a far cry from the corner office on the 40th floor of the Thorne Tower she used to occupy, but that life felt like a fever dream now. Now she was just Elena the waitress, the invisible woman who refilled your wine and laughed at your terrible jokes for a 20% tip. The heavy oak front doors swung open, bringing a gust of freezing wind and the roar of the storm into the warm sanctuary of the restaurant. The hostess stand was empty. Chloe, the hostess, was likely in the back, checking her Instagram. A man stepped inside. The entire restaurant seemed to inhale sharply. He was a disaster. He wore a heavy, dark overcoat that was soaked through, dripping a puddle of muddy water onto the pristine marble foyer. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His beard was unkempt and graying, and he wore battered work boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles. He stood there shivering slightly, looking around the room, with eyes that were piercingly blue, but hidden beneath the shadow of his brow. Rick materialized instantly, like a shark smelling blood. "Excuse me." Rick's voice dripped with disdain, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Sir, you cannot be in here. The shelter is 3 blocks east." The man didn't flinch. He just looked at Rick. "I'm not looking for a shelter. I'm looking for a table. Dinner for one." His voice was rough, gravelly, as if he hadn't spoken in days. Rick let out a cruel, incredulous laugh. "A table? Look at yourself. You're dripping filth on my floor. This is a fine dining establishment, not a soup kitchen. Get out before I call the police." The man's jaw tightened. "I have money. I don't care if you have gold bars in those pockets," Rick sneered, stepping into the man's personal space. "We have a dress code, and we have a standard. You are violating both. Leave." The man looked defeated. His shoulders slumped. It was a look Elena knew well. She saw it in the mirror every morning, the look of someone the world had decided to chew up and spit out. Without thinking, Elena slammed her tray down on the service station. "I'll take him," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Rick spun around his face, turning a shade of purple. "Excuse me, Elena." Elena walked up to the foyer, ignoring the gasps from the wealthy couple at table 7. She stood between Rick and the stranger. "I said I'll take him," Elena repeated, meeting Rick's glare. Table 12 is open in the back corner. It's secluded. He won't bother anyone. And if he has money to pay, we have no legal right to refuse him service based on appearance. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen, Rick. She knew Rick feared corporate headquarters more than he feared God. Rick's eyes narrowed into slits. You seat him, you serve him. And if he dines and dashes, the bill comes out of your paycheck. And then, Elena, you're fired. Fine, Elena whispered. She turned to the stranger. Up close, he smelled of rain and wet wool, but underneath that there was something else, a faint, woody scent of cedar and old paper. Familiar, but she couldn't place it. Right this way, sir, she said softly. The man looked at her. For a second, the harshness in his blue eyes vanished, replaced by a flicker of stunned recognition. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He simply nodded and followed her. She led him to the small two-top in the back near the kitchen doors. It was the worst seat in the house, but tonight it offered privacy. Here, she said, pulling out the chair for him. She grabbed a fresh linen napkin and handed it to him, not to put on his lap, but to wipe the rain from his face. You look frozen. The man took the napkin. His hands were shaking. Thank you, he murmured. Everyone else, they just saw a stray dog. I know what it's like to be judged, Elena said, pouring him a glass of water. I'll give you a moment with the menu. No, he stopped her. He didn't even look at the leather-bound menu. I know what I want. I want the ribeye medium rare, truffle fries, and tea. Tea? Elena asked. Most men ordered scotch on a night like this. Earl Grey, the man said, his gaze intensifying. But please, tell the kitchen not to use the boiling water directly from the spout. Let it sit for 30 seconds. If you burn the leaves, it tastes like metal. Elena froze. The pen hovered over her notepad. The request was specific, insanely specific, and she had heard it before. Flashback, 5 years ago, the top floor of Thorne Enterprises. Elena, the tea is burnt again. How many times do I have to tell you? The physics of the tea leaf requires patience. The voice in her memory was booming, confident younger. The man sitting before her was broken-aged and whispering, but the order was identical. She stared at him, searching his face. The beard disguised his jawline. The wet hair obscured his forehead. But those eyes? No, it couldn't be. Julian Thorne was the CEO of Thorne Enterprises, a billionaire tech mogul. He was currently on the cover of Forbes magazine. He was in Silicon Valley or Tokyo, or on a yacht in the Mediterranean. He wasn't sitting in a wet coat in a Seattle steakhouse, being bullied by a manager named Rick. Besides, Julian Thorne was the man who had ruined her life. Is something wrong? The stranger asked, pulling Elena back to the present. No, Elena stammered, shaking her head. Earl Grey. Gentle water. I'll make it myself. She rushed to the kitchen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The kitchen was a war zone of shouting chefs and sizzling pans, but Elena moved through it in a daze. She prepared the tea herself, watching the thermometer on the kettle. 190 degrees. Not boiling. Just hot enough. Why was she shaking? She placed the teapot on a silver tray and walked back out. When she approached table 12, the stranger was staring out the window at the rain, his reflection looking like a ghost hovering over the city. She poured the tea. He took a sip, closed his eyes, and sighed a long, ragged sound of relief. Perfect, he said. You're the first person in 3 years to get that right. Elena stood by the table clutching her tray. She had to know. You sound like someone I used to know, she said, trying to keep her tone casual. He was particular about his tea, too. The man looked up, a wry, sad smile playing on his lips. Was he a good man? This person you knew? Elena hesitated. He was brilliant, driven, but... No, I wouldn't call him a good man. He didn't look out for the people who looked out for him. The stranger flinched as if she had slapped him. I see. He fired me. Elena added, the bitterness leaking out despite her best efforts. Or rather, he let me take the fall for a mistake I didn't make. I lost my career, my reputation, my savings. Now, I'm here. The man set the teacup down. The porcelain rattled against the saucer. What was your name in that life? Elena, she said. Elena Vance. I was a junior analyst at Thorne Enterprises. The man lowered his head. He stayed silent for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. I remember Elena Vance. She was the brightest mind in the analytics department. She caught the error in the Kraken project data. Elena's breath hitched. Nobody knew I caught that. The report said Silas Greenberg caught it. Silas! The man spat the name like a curse. Yes, Silas took the credit. And when the funds went missing 6 months later, Silas pointed the finger at the person with the access codes. You. I never stole a dime, Elena whispered, looking around to make sure Rick wasn't listening. I was framed. I know, the man said softly. Elena stepped back. Who are you? The man reached into his soaked coat pocket. Elena tensed, half expecting a weapon, but he pulled out a black titanium card, the Centurion, the invite-only American Express. He placed it on the table. My name, he said, is Julian Thorne, and I have made a terrible mistake, Elena. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the man, really looked at him. Without the expensive Italian suit, the clean shave, and the arrogance, he was unrecognizable. But the voice, the tea, the knowledge of the Kraken project. Julian, she gasped. You're supposed to be in New York. You're supposed to be running the world. Why do you look like this? Because, Julian said, leaning in his voice, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I am currently dead. At least that's what my board of directors thinks. Or rather, that's what they hope. Elena's mind reeled. I don't understand. 3 days ago, my private jet had a mechanical failure. I wasn't on it. I decided to drive to the coast to clear my head. The plane went down. Everyone assumes I'm gone. I decided to stay gone for a few days to see what would happen, to see who would remain loyal and who would start carving up my empire. He gestured to his ragged clothes. I bought these at a thrift store. I wanted to see the world from down here. I wanted to see who would treat a nobody with dignity. He looked at Elena, his gaze intense. I came into this restaurant because I used to own the building. I didn't expect to find you here. But finding the woman I failed 3 years ago. That is fate, Elena. Just then, Rick stormed over to the table. He didn't see the credit card. He only saw the two of them talking. Elena, Rick barked. Stop fraternizing with the vagrant. Table 6 has been waiting for their wine for 5 minutes. Do your job or get out. Julian stood up. He wasn't a shivering homeless man anymore. He rose to his full 6'2" height, and even in the dirty coat, he radiated an air of absolute terrifying authority. Rick, is it? Julian asked. Rick blinked, taken aback by the change in the man's demeanor. Excuse me, I'm going to pay my bill now, Julian said calmly. And then I'm going to have a conversation with the owner of this franchise. I believe his name is Mr. Henderson. Rick laughed nervously. You think you can talk to Mr. Henderson? You can't even afford a shower. Julian picked up the black titanium card and held it up. The light caught the matte surface. Rick's eyes bugged out. He knew that card. He knew you had to spend millions just to be invited to have one. Run the card, Rick, Julian commanded, And add a $5,000 tip for Miss Vance." Rick turned pale. He took the card with trembling fingers and walked to the terminal. Eleanor turned to Julian. "Julian, you can't be here. If Silas or anyone finds out you're alive before you're ready." "Silas is the reason I'm here," Julian said, his voice hardening. "He's the one who sabotaged the plane. He's the one who framed you. And on Monday morning at the shareholder meeting, he is planning to vote himself in as the new CEO." Julian grabbed his napkin and a pen from Elena's apron. He scribbled something down frantically. "I can't do this alone, Elena. I have no access to my digital files without alerting them. I have no allies I can trust. They're all watching my accounts, my lawyers, my house." He pressed the napkin into her hand. "I need an analyst. I need someone who knows the system, who knows Silas's tricks, and who has a reason to want him taken down. I need you." Elena looked at the napkin. It was an address for a safe house in the hills and a time Sunday midnight. "You want me to help you take back your company?" Elena asked. "The company that fired me." "I want you to help me burn the corruption to the ground," Julian corrected. "And if we succeed, I will give you the position you deserved, VP of Operations, and I will clear your name publicly." Rick returned, looking like he was about to vomit. He handed the card back to Julian, with 2 hands, bowing slightly. "The transaction was approved, sir. I am so sorry about the misunderstanding." Julian didn't even look at him. He looked at Elena. "Sunday. Midnight. Can I count on you?" Elena looked at Rick, who was sweating bullets. She looked at the heavy tray of dishes waiting for her. She thought about her small apartment and the debt collectors calling her phone. She looked Julian Thorne in the eye. "I'll be there," she whispered. Julian nodded, turned and walked out into the rain, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Elena looked down at the receipt. The tip wasn't $5,000. It was $50,000, and written on the merchant copy in elegant cursive were 3 words: "The game begins." The silence in the gilded cage following Julian Thorne's exit was heavier than the humid air before a tornado. The door swung shut. The rain blurred the glass, and for a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the jazz music that seemed entirely inappropriate for the mood. Rick stared at the merchant copy of the receipt as if it were a radioactive isotope. His hands were shaking so violently the paper made a crinkling sound. $50,000. It was more than Rick made in a year. "Elena!" Rick croaked, his voice cracking. He looked up his face, a mask of sudden, desperate ingratiation. "Elena, darling, listen. About earlier. The heat of the moment, you understand. The pressure of the Friday rush." Elena stood by table 12, looking at the empty teacup. The scent of bergamot still lingered in the air, overpowering the smell of steak and old wine. She felt a strange buzzing in her fingertips, the adrenaline of a life she thought she had buried. "Rick," Elena said, her voice surprisingly calm. "Did the transaction clear?" Yes, it authorized," Rick stammered. "But Elena, we need to discuss the tip pool policy. A tip of this magnitude. Technically, the House policy states that anything over 20% is subject to managerial discretion regarding distribution." Elena slowly untied the knot of her apron. The fabric felt rough against her waist, a shackle she had worn for 3 years. "Rick," she said, cutting him off, "there is no tip pool for this. He wrote my name on the line, and you are not going to touch a cent of it." "Now let's be reasonable." Rick stepped forward, regaining a fraction of his bullying bluster. "You're still an employee here. If you want to keep your job," Elena laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that made the diners at table 11 look over nervously. She pulled the apron off, bundled it into a ball, and dropped it onto the floor, right next to the muddy boot print Julian had left. "I quit," she said. "You can't just walk out in the middle of a shift." Rick shouted, his face reddening. "You'll never work in this town again. I'll blacklist you." Elena grabbed her purse from the server station. She turned to Rick, her eyes flashing. "Rick, the man who just left, is Julian Thorne. He owns this building. He owns the bank that holds the loan on your house. He owns the company that insures your car. If I were you, I wouldn't worry about blacklisting me. I'd worry about whether you're going to have a job on Monday." She walked out the front door, pushing past the stunned hostess, and stepped into the pouring rain. She didn't run. She stood there for a moment, letting the freezing water soak her uniform, washing away the smell of grease and servitude. She clutched the napkin with the address in her pocket, like it was a lifeline. But as she walked toward the bus stop, the euphoria faded, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Silas Greenberg. The name made her stomach turn. Silas wasn't just a corporate shark, he was a predator. 3 years ago, when she had stumbled upon the anomaly in the Kraken project code, she had thought Silas was her mentor. She had brought the data to him. She had trusted him. 2 days later, security was escorting her out of the building. Her hard drive wiped her bank accounts, frozen pending an embezzlement investigation. Silas had stood by the elevator watching her leave with a look of mock sympathy. If Silas had sabotaged Julian's plane, he was willing to kill. And if Julian was alive and Silas found out... Elena stopped walking. She was on 4th Avenue, the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. A black SUV with tinted windows was idling half a block behind her. It could be an Uber. It could be anyone. But her analyst brain, the brain that saw patterns where others saw chaos, kicked into overdrive. The SUV had no front license plate. It had been parked across from the restaurant when she came out. She didn't go to the bus stop. She turned sharply into a crowded alleyway that cut through to 5th, weaving through the trash cans and the huddled figures seeking shelter. She moved fast, her heart hammering against her ribs. She burst out onto the next street and immediately hailed a yellow cab, diving into the back seat. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Just drive," Elena said, slouching down in the seat. "Head toward the ferry terminal. I'll tell you when to turn." She watched out the rear window. The black SUV didn't appear. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She wasn't going home. Her apartment wasn't safe. If Julian was being watched, his former employees might be on a list too. She had to go off the grid. "Change of plans," she told the driver. "Take me to the 24-hour storage facility on Western Avenue." She had kept one secret from the world and from Silas. When she was fired, they had stripped her of her company assets, but they hadn't found the encrypted backup drive she kept in a hollowed-out book in a storage unit, her insurance policy that she had been too scared to use. Until now. Sunday, 11:45 p.m., the rain had turned into a thick mist that clung to the trees of the Cascade foothills. Elena drove her battered Honda Civic up the winding gravel road, the headlights cutting through the fog. The address Julian had given her led to nowhere, a dead zone on the GPS. It was deep in the forest, miles away from the prying eyes of the city. She saw the gate first. It was rusted and overgrown with ivy, looking abandoned. But as her car approached, a red laser scanned her license plate, and the gate swung open silently. She drove through the tires, crunching on gravel. The safe house wasn't a house. It was a brutalist concrete structure built into the side of the mountain, half buried in the earth. It looked less like a home and more like a bunker, designed to survive a nuclear winter. She parked next to a sleek, matte black motorcycle, Julian's presumably. Elena grabbed her backpack. Inside was her laptop, the recovered hard drive, and a thermos of coffee. She took a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back. The heavy steel front door opened before she could knock. Julian Thorne stood in the doorway. He had shaved the beard. His hair was cut short, again sharp and military style. He wore a black tactical turtleneck and dark jeans. He looked like the titan of industry she remembered, but harder, leaner. The softness she had seen in the restaurant was gone, replaced by a terrifying intensity. "You came," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of relief. "I told you I would," Elena said. "Come in. We don't have much time." The interior of the bunker was stark. Concrete walls, exposed piping, and a massive central room dominated by a bank of monitors that were currently dark. The only light came from a single hanging bulb over a large wooden table covered in blueprints and scattered papers. "Tea?" Julian asked, gesturing to a pot on the side table. "Coffee," Elena countered. "If we're taking down Silas, I need caffeine, not tranquility." Julian cracked a rare smile. "Fair enough." He walked over to the wall of monitors and typed a command into a keyboard. The screens flickered to life. Elena gasped. The screens were displaying live feeds, not just news channels but security camera footage. The lobby of Thorne Tower, the parking garage, the hallway outside the executive suite. "How?" Elena asked. "I thought you were locked out." "I am locked out of the mainframe," Julian said, pacing the room. "I can't access the accounts, the project files, or the board communications. But I built the building, Elena. I hardwired a localized surveillance backdoor into the HVAC system 10 years ago. Silas knows about the network security, but he doesn't know about the physical taps." He pointed to the center screen. It showed the interior of the CEO's office, Julian's old office. Silas Greenberg was sitting at the desk. He was a handsome man, in a serpentine way, slicked back blonde hair, expensive rimless glasses, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He was on the phone leaning back in Julian's leather chair, swirling a glass of scotch. "He looks comfortable," Elena said, her voice dripping with venom. "He thinks he's won," Julian said. "He's calling for a vote of no confidence in my absence tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Once he is voted in as interim CAO, he initiates the sale." "The sale?" Elena looked at Julian. "Thorne Enterprises is a $1 trillion company. You don't just sell it." "Not the company," Julian corrected. "Project Kraken." Elena froze. But Kraken was just a data aggregation tool. It was designed to optimize supply chains. Julian shook his head grimly. "That's what I told the public. That's what I told the lower-level analysts. But Silas pushed the development team in secret. He altered the algorithm. Kraken isn't just an aggregator anymore, Elena. It's a predictive behavior engine." He walked over to the table and slammed his hand down on a blueprint. "It predicts political instability. It predicts market crashes. It predicts riots before they happen. In the wrong hands, it doesn't just predict the future, it allows you to manipulate it. Silas is selling the source code to the Helios Group." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The Helios Group was a private military contractor with ties to some of the most oppressive regimes on the planet. "If Helios gets Kraken," Elena whispered, "they can topple governments, they can crash currencies." "Exactly," Julian said. "Silas is selling it for $20 billion. The transfer is scheduled to happen the moment he is named CEO. So we have to stop the vote," Elena said. "No," Julian said. "The board is in his pocket. We can't stop the vote. We have to stop the transfer. We have to delete Kraken." "Delete it?" Elena asked. "But the backups, the cloud servers—" "I know where the physical core is," Julian said. "It's in the server farm in the basement of Thorne Tower, air-gapped. If we wipe the core, the cloud backups are useless because they rely on the core's encryption key to unlock. He looked at Elena. I can get us into the building. I know the service entrances. But I can't hack the core. The biometric lock requires 2 retinas. Mine, and the chief analyst's. Silas, Elena said. Yes, but 3 years ago, before you were fired, you were the lead on Kraken's beta test. You had admin privileges. Which were revoked, Elena said. Silas wiped my credentials. He wiped your active credentials, Julian said, his eyes gleaming. But did he wipe the ghost protocol? Elena smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. The ghost protocol, she mused. I wrote a backdoor script, in case I ever got locked out during a debug session. It creates a temporary admin user if you input a specific sequence of prime numbers into the command line. Does Silas know about it? No, Elena said. It's buried in the kernel code. He's a suit, Julian. He doesn't read kernel code. He just reads profit margins. Can you execute it? If I can get to a terminal connected to the core, Elena said. Yes, but there's a problem. What? The sequence requires a manual override at the terminal, Elena explained. And the terminal is inside the server room, which is guarded by biometric scanners, motion sensors, and probably armed guards. Julian reached under the table and pulled out a large black case. He unlatched it. Inside were 2 tactical vests, earpieces, and a strange device that looked like a high-tech soldering iron. I have a plan for the guards, Julian said, and I have a plan for the biometrics. He pulled out a 3D printed eyeball. It looked disturbingly realistic. I scanned Silas's retinal data from the security feed when he looked into the camera in the elevator, Julian explained. It's not perfect, but it should fool the scanner once. We have 1 shot. Elena looked at the gear. She looked at the man who had been a beggar 2 days ago, and was now planning a corporate heist that felt more like a suicide mission. If we get caught, Elena said, we go to prison for life, or Helios kills us. Yes, Julian said simply. But if we don't do this, the world burns. He held out his hand. Are you ready to be an analyst again, Elena? Elena looked at her hands, the hands that had carried trays of steak and cleaned up, spilled wine. They were steady now. No, she said, taking his hand. I'm not an analyst tonight. Tonight I'm the executioner. Julian nodded. Grab your gear. We leave in 10 minutes. The storm is getting worse, which is good. It will mask our heat signatures. As Eleanor strapped on the vest, she noticed something on the corner of the desk. It was an old employee file. Her file. Julian had been reading it. You kept this? She asked. I sent for it the day I realized Silas was lying. Julian said, not looking up, as he checked the charge on the retinal bypass device. I was going to call you back. I was going to apologize. But then the SEC investigation started, and I got distracted. I let you down, Elena. I let a lot of people down, because I was too focused on being the great Julian Thorne. He turned to her, his expression raw. Tonight isn't just about saving the company. It's about balancing the ledger. You shouldn't be here. You should be running your own department. You should be happy. Instead, you're in a bunker wearing body armor. We are where we are, Elena said, closing her laptop and sliding it into her waterproof bag. Let's go balance the ledger. They stepped out into the night. The rain was torrential now, a deluge that washed over the world. They got into the black SUV Julian had hidden in the garage armor-plated bulletproof. As they drove down the mountain, toward the glowing city skyline of Seattle, Elena felt a shift in the universe. The waitress was gone. The victim was gone. They were driving into the belly of the beast. and for the first time in 3 years, Elena Vance didn't feel afraid. She felt dangerous. The Thorne Tower pierced the Seattle night like a jagged shard of black glass. Standing 50 stories tall, it was a monument to Julian's ambition, but tonight, staring up at it from the alleyway near the loading docks, it looked more like a tombstone. The rain had intensified, turning the alley into a river of grime. Julian parked the SUV behind a dumpster, killing the engine. The loading dock entry uses an older keycard system, Julian whispered, checking his watch. 2:15 a.m. The shift change for the private security detail happens at 2:30. We have 15 minutes to get from the basement entrance to the server antechamber on sub-level 3. Elena adjusted the tactical vest. It was heavy, restricting her breathing. And what about the cameras in the loading bay? I designed the blind spots. Julian said, a grim smile touching his lips. Follow me exactly. If you step 2 feet to the left, thermal imaging will pick you up. They moved efficiently. Julian led the way, hugging the brick wall. He stopped at a heavy steel door marked Waste Management. He didn't use a keycard. Instead, he knelt and pried open a rusted panel near the ground, exposing a bundle of wires. I haven't done this since I was 20, he muttered, using a small multi-tool to strip 2 wires. You broke into buildings when you were 20, Elena asked, keeping a lookout. How do you think I learned to build secure ones? Julian replied. He touched the wires together. A spark hissed, and the magnetic lock disengaged with a heavy clunk. They slipped inside. The air smelled of cardboard and industrial cleaner. They were in the service corridors, the veins of the building that the executives never saw. We need to get to the freight elevator, Julian said. It's the only one that goes down to sub-level 3 without a biometric override. They moved down the long, fluorescent-lit hallway. Suddenly the sound of heavy boots echoed around the corner. Julian grabbed Elena's arm and shoved her into a janitorial closet, pulling the door shut, just as 2 men walked past. Through the slats in the vent, Elena saw them. They weren't the usual Thorne Enterprises security guards in blue blazers. These men wore grey fatigues, carried assault rifles, and had the Helios Group insignia, a burning sun on their shoulders. Mercenaries! Elena breathed, her blood running cold. Silas brought in an army. He's not taking chances, Julian whispered, back, his jaw tight. He knows that if I survived, I'd come back. He's turned my building into a fortress. They waited for the footsteps to fade. When the coast was clear, they moved again. They reached the freight elevator, but the panel was dead. They cut the power to the lift, Julian cursed. Smart. Stairs, Elena suggested. It's 20 flights down to the sub-levels from the main plant, and the stairwells will be alarmed. Elena looked around the loading bay. Her eyes landed on a laundry chute marked Hazardous Materials. Julian, she said, pointing. Where does that go? Julian looked at the chute. That feeds directly into the incinerator room on sub-level 2. The incinerator is offline for maintenance on weekends. He looked at her eyebrows raised. You want to slide down a garbage chute. Unless you have wings, Elena said, opening the hatch. It's the only way down. Julian let out a short, incredulous laugh. I used to make people wear $3,000 suits to enter this building. Now I'm sliding down a trash chute. After you, boss, Elena said. The slide was terrifying. It was pitch black, smelling of ozone and dust, and they plummeted down the spiraling metal tube for what felt like forever. They were dumped out into a pile of shredded paper and cardboard in a massive, dimly lit room. Elena groaned, pulling herself out of the pile. I think I bruised a rib. We're in, Julian said, brushing shredded documents off his tactical turtleneck. Sub-level 2. The server farm is 1 floor down. They crept through the mechanical room, the hum of massive cooling fans drowning out their footsteps. This was the heart of the beast. The heat was intense. They reached the service stairwell to sub-level 3. Julian peered through the small window in the door. "Problem," he hissed. Elena looked. Standing in front of the massive titanium doors of the server room were 2 Helios guards. They weren't moving, and unlike the lobby patrols, they were facing the door fully alert. "We can't take them," Elena said. "Not without noise, and noise brings the rest of them." Julian looked around the mechanical room. "We need a distraction. Something that pulls them away from the door, but doesn't trigger a general alarm." Elena scanned the room. Her eyes landed on the fire suppression control panel. "The halon system," she said. "If I trigger a localized sensor fault in the hallway, the system will think there's a fire. It won't trigger the sprinklers, but it will trigger the blast doors to seal the hallway. If the blast doors seal, the guards will be trapped on the other side," Julian realized. "But so will the server room door." "No," Elena said, her mind racing through the schematics she had memorized years ago. "There's a 30-second delay before the blast doors slam shut to allow personnel to evacuate. The protocol is for guards to clear the area immediately." "So we trigger the alarm," Julian said. "They run out. We run in before the doors slam. If we miss the window, we get crushed," Elena finished, "or trapped in the hallway with the halon gas, which sucks the oxygen out of the air." "High stakes," Julian nodded. "I like it." Elena ran to the control panel. She popped the cover and plugged her laptop into the diagnostic port. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Override complete," she muttered, spoofing a thermal spike in Sector 4. "Now." A piercing klaxon shrieked through the basement. An automated voice boomed. "Warning, thermal criticality in Sector 4. Evacuate immediately. Blast doors closing in 30 seconds. The 2 guards at the door jumped. They looked at each other, then at the flashing red lights. They didn't hesitate. They turned and sprinted toward the exit at the far end of the hall. "Go!" Julian yelled. He and Elena burst out of the mechanical room and sprinted down the hallway. 20 seconds. The heavy steel blast doors at either end of the corridor began to slide out from the walls with a grinding roar. Elena's legs burned. The adrenaline was the only thing keeping her moving. Julian was ahead of her, his stride long. 10 seconds. The gap was closing. 4 feet. 3 feet. Julian reached the server room door. He fumbled for the retinal scanner device. "Elena, hurry!" Elena threw herself forward. The blast door behind them slammed shut with a concussive boom. They were trapped in the corridor segment with the server room door. The halon gas vents hissed, preparing to release. "Julian!" Elena screamed. The gas. Julian jammed the 3D printed eyeball against the scanner. The laser swept over the fake eye. Beep, beep, beep. Red light. Access denied. "It didn't work," Julian gasped, staring at the scanner. "The resolution isn't high enough." The gas vents opened. A white mist began to pour into the hallway. "We're going to suffocate," Elena coughed, covering her mouth. Julian grabbed the scanner with both hands, shaking it. "Come on!" "The code," Elena yelled. "The ghost protocol is there a keyboard?" "No, it's biometric only." Elena looked at the scanner. "Wait, the secondary verify. Try your eye. Your real eye. I told you it needs 2 distinct authorizations. Just do it." Julian leaned in. The laser scanned his eye. Beep. Green light. User 1 verified Julian Thorne. Now the fake one. Elena grabbed the fake eye from him. She noticed a smudge of dirt on the lens from their slide down the chute. She frantically wiped it on her shirt and jammed it against the glass. The laser scanned. The gas was filling the room. Elena's vision was blurring. Beep. Green light. User 2. Verified Silas Greenberg. Click-thunk. The massive titanium door hissed open. Julian grabbed Elena and threw them both inside, hitting the close button on the inside panel. The door sealed just as the hallway filled with lethal gas. They collapsed on the floor of the server room, gasping for air. It was freezing inside, kept at a constant 60 degrees for the machines. The room was bathed in an ethereal blue light from the thousands of server racks stretching into the darkness. "We made it," Julian wheezed. "We're alive." Elena sat up, checking her laptop. "We're not safe yet. We have to wipe the core." The server room was a cathedral of data. The hum here was louder, a physical vibration in the floor. In the center of the room stood the core, a massive circular console surrounded by a ring of monitors. This was the brain of Thorne Enterprises. This was where Kraken lived. Elena approached the console. She felt a strange reverence. She had helped build this, and now she was here to kill it. "Plug me in," Elena said, setting up her laptop. Julian connected the hard line. "I'll watch the door. If Silas sees the server room door opened on his board, he'll send everyone he has." Elena cracked her knuckles. "I need 5 minutes." She began to type. The screen flooded with cascading code. She bypassed the standard encryption using the developer keys she had hidden years ago. She was navigating the digital labyrinth like she was walking through her own living room. "I'm in the root directory," Elena said, locating the Kraken executable. She found it. The file was massive. It wasn't just code. It was a living, learning entity. It pulsed on the screen. "Initiate deletion sequence." YN Elena hesitated for a microsecond. This was brilliance. It was the most advanced AI ever created. Destroying it felt like burning the Library of Alexandria. "Elena," Julian called out, "we have company. The cameras show the elevator moving." "I'm doing it," Elena said. She hit Y. "Password required." Elena froze. "It's password protected. A manual override password." "Try Silas's birthday," Julian suggested. "No, it's alphanumeric 128-bit encryption," Elena said, panic rising. "He added a failsafe." "Can you crack it?" "Not in 5 minutes. Maybe in 5 years." The elevator dinged in the hallway outside. The blast doors had retracted, now that the alarm was cleared. "They're here," Julian said, drawing a heavy wrench he had grabbed from the mechanical room. It was a pathetic weapon against assault rifles. Elena stared at the screen. "Password hint. The one who sees the floor." Her heart stopped. "The hint," Elena whispered. "It's me." "What?" "Silas. He used a password related to me. He was obsessed with the fact that I caught his mistake. The one who sees the floor." She typed, "Elena Vance. Access denied." She typed, "Analyst. Access denied." "Think Elena," she screamed at herself. "What did he call you when he fired you? Flashback." Silas standing over her desk. "You're a glitch, Elena, a variable I didn't account for. You're the chaos in the system." Elena typed, "Chaos variable. Access granted." "I'm in," Elena shouted. "Deleting Kraken, now." A progress bar appeared. "Deletion 10%, 20%, bang." The server room door blew open. Sparks showered the room. Julian was thrown back by the blast. He hit the floor hard. Silas Greenberg walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a tactical vest over his dress shirt, holding a suppressed pistol. He looked calm, almost bored. 2 Helios mercenaries stood behind him. "Stop the deletion," Silas said, aiming the gun at Elena's head. Elena's finger hovered over the enter key. The bar was at 45%. "Step away from the console, Elena," Silas said, his voice smooth. "I knew Julian would try something heroic, but I honestly didn't expect to see you. I thought you were serving burgers somewhere." "Steaks," Elena said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I served steaks." "Julian." Silas looked down at his former friend, who was groaning on the floor. You look terrible. The homeless look really doesn't suit you. It's better than the traitor look, Julian spat, struggling to sit up. It's just business. Julian. Silas shrugged. You wanted to save the world with clean energy and ethical tech. I want to own the world. Helios pays better. He turned the gun back to Elena. Cancel the command, or I paint the server rack with your brains. Elena looked at the screen. 60%. She looked at Julian. He met her eyes. He gave a microscopic nod. If I cancel it, Elena said, standing up slowly, hands raised. You'll kill us anyway. Probably, Silas admitted. But I'll make it quick. If you let that program delete, I will hand you over to the Helios interrogation team. They can keep you alive for weeks while they peel you apart. Elena swallowed. She looked at the progress bar. 70%. You can't sell it if it's gone, Silas, she said. Your $20 billion evaporates. I have a backup, Silas lied. No, you don't, Julian said, standing up. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. Because I know how the architecture works. The cloud backup syncs every 10 minutes. If the core is deleted, it sends a kill signal to the backups to prevent data corruption. If she finishes that deletion, Kraken is gone everywhere. Forever. Silas's face twitched. The calm mask slipped. Move away from the keyboard. Silas screamed, cocking the hammer. Elena looked at the keyboard. It was 2 feet away. You need to type a command to stop it, Silas, Elena said softly. Do you know the abort code? Silas hesitated. He glanced at the screen. In that split second of distraction, Julian roared and tackled Silas. The gun went off. Thwip. The bullet shattered a monitor next to Elena's head. Kill them! Silas screamed, wrestling with Julian on the floor. The 2 mercenaries raised their rifles. Elena didn't dive for cover. She dove for the keyboard. She slammed her hand down on the enter key to confirm the final wipe. Deletion complete. The screens all around the room went black. The blue light died. The hum of the drives stopped. The silence was deafening. Then the emergency red lights kicked in. Silas threw Julian off him and scrambled to his feet. He looked at the black screens. His face went pale, then purple. You, he whispered. You burned it. You burned $20 billion. He raised the gun, aiming directly at Elena's chest. I'm going to kill you slowly. Julian was on the ground, winded. He couldn't reach him. Elena closed her eyes. She had won. It didn't matter what happened next. Click. Silas pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun had jammed during the struggle. Silas stared at the gun in disbelief. Before the mercenaries could fire, a voice boomed over the intercom. But it wasn't the automated warning system. This is the Seattle Police Department. We have the building surrounded. Drop your weapons. Silas froze. Police. Julian started laughing. It was a wheezing, painful laugh. You forgot one thing, Silas. Julian gasped. When Elena triggered the halon alarm, that system is hardwired to the Seattle Fire Department. And when the fire department responds to a Tier 1 building with armed men in the lobby, they call SWAT. Silas looked at the mercenaries. Hold them off. Get me to the chopper on the roof. The mercenaries looked at the angry billionaire, then at the dead screens, then at the distinct sound of flashbang grenades going off in the elevator lobby upstairs. They lowered their rifles. We don't get paid enough for SWAT, one of them said. They turned and ran. Silas was alone. He looked at Julian. He looked at Elena. He dropped the useless gun. I can fix this. Silas muttered, his eyes darting around. I can claim you broke in. I can claim you're terrorists. Elena stepped forward. She picked up her laptop. You can try, she said. But while the deletion was running, I was also running a secondary script. I just emailed every email, every chat log, and every financial transaction you've made in the last 3 years to the FBI, the SEC, and the New York Times. She hit one final key on her laptop. Sent. Silas fell to his knees, the arrogance finally drained out of him, leaving just a small, greedy man in a vest that was too big for him. Julian stood up, limping over to Elena. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Nice work, analyst," he said softly. Elena looked up at him and smiled. "Nice work, boss." Dawn broke over Seattle, painting the wet pavement in gold. The storm had finally passed. Outside the Thorne Tower, the flashing lights of federal SUVs outnumbered the fading stars. Elena sat on the rear bumper of an ambulance, a shock blanket around her shoulders, watching as Silas Greenberg, the man who had stolen 3 years of her life, was shoved into the back of a squad car. He looked small, stripped of his arrogance and his empire. Julian handed her a paper cup of coffee. "Kraken is gone. Thorne Enterprises is pivoting." "Pivoting to what?" Elena asked, feeling the warmth return to her fingers. "Venture capital. But not for the elite. I want to fund the people the world gave up on, the outcasts. I need a VP of operations who can spot diamonds in the rough." He held out his hand. "Interested?" Elena smiled, shaking it firmly. "Double my old salary. And full dental." 3 months later, the Friday rush at the Gilded Cage was chaotic. Rick was at the hostess stand, fiercely berating a trembling new busboy for a water spot on a glass. "If you drop another glass, you're out on the street," Rick spat. The heavy oak doors swung open. Rick pasted on a sycophantic smile, turning to greet the new arrivals. The smile died instantly. Elena Vance stood there, not in a stained apron, but in a tailored cream power suit. Beside her was Julian, looking every bit the billionaire, yet far warmer than before. The entire restaurant went silent. "Table for 2, Rick," Elena said, her voice cool and steady. "The back corner. And please, ensure the tea water isn't boiling. We wouldn't want to ruin the leaves." Rick turned a shade of pale, usually reserved for dead fish. His hands shook violently as he grabbed 2 menus. Right away, Miss Vance." As they sat at table 12, Elena glanced at the terrified busboy near the kitchen. "Rick," she called out softly. "Yes, Miss Vance." "Be kind to the kid," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "You never know who he might turn out to be." Rick swallowed hard, nodded, and retreated into the shadows. Julian raised his teacup in a toast. "To the waitress who saved my life." Elena clinked her porcelain cup against his. "To the billionaire who finally learned to tip." Elena's story reminds us that the wheel of fortune is always turning. The person you kick when they're down today might be the person holding your future in their hands tomorrow. Elena didn't help Julian because she knew he was rich. She helped him because she knew what it felt like to be cold. In a world full of Ricks being Elena, you never know when a simple act of kindness will change the world, or at least topple a corrupt empire. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about karma hitting back, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next video.